like to start by setting the tone for the session by discussing some recent tailings failures and responses to those failures. On average, there are 2.5 reported tailings dam failures globally each year. However, recent significant global tailings dam failures indicate that step changes in operational performance are needed across the mining industry. The most notable of these recent failures include the failure at Imperial Metals Mount Poly Mine in British Columbia, Canada, which occurred in August 2014. This failure resulted in significant changes to the regulatory environment in British Columbia and changes to guidelines from the Canadian Dam Association and other organizations across North America. Shortly thereafter, in November 2015, the Fundão Dam at the Samarco mine in Brazil failed. This mine was a joint venture between Vale and BHP and resulted in significant changes to the regulatory environment in Brazil, but it also had further reaching impacts. Of note is that the International Council on Mining and Metals, ICMM, published a position statement in 2016 on preventing catastrophic failure of tailings dams. Then, on January 25, 2019, the failure of Dam 1 at Vale's Carrego de Feijão mine near Brumadinho resulted in 270 fatalities and was the worst industrial accident in Brazil's history. This failure resulted in nearly overnight changes to the regulations in Brazil, including banning of upstream constructed dams and requiring declassification of existing upstream constructed dams. Additionally, this failure resulted in far-reaching global initiatives. Shortly after the January 2019 failure, the ICMM, the United Nations Environment Program, and the Principles for Responsible Investment co-convened the Global Tailings Review in an effort to improve tailing safety and establish best practices. The key outcome of the GTR was the Global Industry Standard on Tailings Management, and it was published on August 5th. ICMM member companies have made a commitment to comply with the GISTM and have established a time frame for implementation that includes 3 years for priority facilities and an additional 2 years for the remainder of the sites. The investors also responded to the failure at Brumadinho. They sent an urgent letter in 2019 to 727 listed extractive companies requesting disclosure of every individual tailings facility under their control. The request was part of an urgent global engagement by investors in response to the Brumadinho tailings dam disaster. And now we have Elaine Baker, who's actually going to tell us a little bit more about that particular the investor response. So Elaine, welcome very much to the panel. Isabel already introduced you. You are the UNESCO chair at the University of Sydney and Australian manager of Grid Arundel. So welcome, Elaine.
Thank you very much, Kim. It's very nice to be here. Yes, I have the Grid Arundel office here at the University of Sydney, and Grid Arundel is a Norwegian foundation. It's an official collaborating centre with the United Nations Environment Programme. And for the last many years, I've worked extensively on mining policy and with colleagues at Grid Arundel, looking at things like illegal and unethical mining, looking at the use of mercury in artisanal gold mining, especially from a gender perspective with health of women and children. And as you mentioned, Kim, after the Samarco incident, UNEP asked Grid Arundel to do a rapid response assessment on tailings dam management, and that resulted in the publication of the Mine Tailings Storage Safety is No Accident. And that publication made a number of recommendations, one of which was the establishment of a global standard. And we were just sort of tootling along with that. We developed after the publication, we convened a stakeholder forum, which had a meeting in Canada. But we were seeing it as a long-term process. And then, of course, there was the Brumadinho accident, and that sort of put a bomb up everything. And people realised that we really needed to, start looking at this much more seriously. And as you mentioned, there were two things that happened in parallel: the co-conveners with the review, and the Church of England and Swedish pension fund, who developed the investor, I think it's called the Investor Mine Safety and Tailings Initiative. And they were the ones who sent the letters to the mining companies to disclose the information. Now, do you want me to go on and talk about question 2 now? No, okay. Oh, that's right. You've got to introduce the other panelists. Sorry, guys.
So I have your slides ready for you, Elaine, if you would like to talk to those.
Okay, so you're not introducing the other panelists. We are going to question 2.
No, so you're not asking, we're not asking questions yet. You're each doing your introductory statement with the slides that you provided, if you don't mind, Elaine.
Okay. So what Kim is showing now on the screen is the front page of the Tailings portal. And as mentioned, the Church of England sent this request to over 700 listed mining companies. So I should say here that this Tailings portal was never meant to be encyclopedic. It was never meant to cover, all tailings dams. It was really just focused on listed companies in the beginning. And many of those companies have replied, and some of them didn't have tailings dams, but many of them did. And what they did was they put that information onto their websites. And we took that information off the websites in a really laborious process and made this tailings dam portal. And at the moment, I think you can see on the bottom there, we've got over 1,800 tailings storage facilities listed here. Kim, can we have the next slide? Okay, this is I just chose one area of the portal. This is the dashboard view, and I just chose Alcoa. It's near the top of the list. But basically, you can choose any of the mining companies that have responded and given us their information, and we've made this dashboard, which basically summarizes their operations. And you can go through, and this table at the bottom that you can see on the bottom left-hand side, you can go through all their tailing storage facilities. In this case with Alcoa, you can see on the top right, there's 104 tailing storage facilities. And when you click on those, you get a satellite image of the storage facility. So there's a huge amount of information that's been provided from these 20 questions. Next, oh no, not the next slide. I think that's for the next question. Okay.
All right. Well, thank you very much for that introduction, Elaine. Now I'd like to welcome Mitchell Krabs. He's the president and CEO of Coeur Mining. He was named president and CEO in July 2011. He holds a bachelor's degree in economics from the Wharton School at the University of Pennsylvania and an MBA from Harvard University. So thank you very much for joining us today, Mitchell.
Yeah, thanks, Kim. Hi. Thanks to the Mexican Mining Forum for the opportunity to talk to you all a little bit today. I'll start with just a quick company overview, if that's okay. We're a US-based company with 5 operations in North America, 3 in the US, 1 in Mexico, and 1 in Canada. We produce gold and silver, approximately 350,000 ounces of gold annually and around 10 million ounces of silver a year. We've got a great ESG profile, kind of peer leading scoring by third parties that we're really proud of. And our largest operation is the one in Mexico called Palmarejo in Chihuahua, on the very southwest corner of Chihuahua. It started up production in 2010. It employs about 900 people, and it produces about 110,000 ounces of gold a year and 6 or 7 million ounces of silver a year. So that's a little bit about us. And just turning now to a bit about our tailings dam kind of profile. We really view our approach to tailings management through the lens of our culture and our values. Our purpose statement as a company is we pursue a higher standard with 3 kind of elements to that around protect, develop, and deliver. And that is a framework that really lended itself a few years ago to help us and guide us toward the creation of a framework that we use for tailings management at the company and for sustainability in that area. And that's what I've summarized, or what we've summarized here on on this slide, and then the next one, Kim, that I won't take the time to go through and read in any detail. But in terms of just some specifics, and Kim, maybe you can go to the next one. We have 4 tailings facilities at our company. 2 of them are at active underground operations. This one here is the Kensington tailings facility up in Alaska. It's a gold mine just outside of Juneau, Alaska. What's interesting about this one from a tailings management sustainability standpoint, I think, is almost half, nearly half of the tailings go back underground. There is paste backfill, and we can maybe get into that in a little bit more detail in the Q&A. And then next slide is a quick photo and summary of our tailings impoundment there at Palmarejo. And what I think is interesting here, and maybe why I was asked to participate in this panel, is this has been a traditional facility, and we're now in the process of transitioning away from this facility to an in-pit filtered tailings disposal method, which we're really excited about. That'll allow us to transition away from this facility, close it, and get out of the tailings impoundment business there, and backfill legacy pits from the first few years of the mine's life. So we're excited about that. And then I threw in one other slide, next one, and this is just an example. This was from a mine the company owned and operated 25 years ago down in New Zealand called Golden Cross. And I wanted to put this up as just an example of a tailings situation that went bad. I guess this might be an example of making lemonade out of lemons. There was a small land slip under the tailings impoundment, which prompted a swift remediation and closure of the facility. But it's just a great before and after of what we've been able to do there in New Zealand. And the high bar that we set for ourselves down there, not only is that consistent with who we are as a company, but when you can show communities and regulators and others that this is the kind of standard that we have, this is the kind of work that we do in a situation that wasn't ideal for anybody, I think it just really goes a long way toward that whole social license and having a credible reputation and story to tell when it comes to how we do things. So just, all of our tailings impoundments are downstream constructed, keyed into bedrock, built out of high strength rock, and we can get into a little bit more around governance and monitoring and things like that maybe in the Q&A. So that's my introductory comment, Kim.
Thank you very much for that, Mitchell. Much appreciated. So now I'd like to welcome Bradley Langille, who's CEO and Director of Go Gold Resources. He was the co-founder of both Gammon Gold and Mex Gold Resources and served as a director and CEO of both companies. He served as strategic advisor for Nariat Gold from 2007 to 2010, and with his guidance developed the Orion project from initial stages through scoping study, and was instrumental in the company being acquired by Capital Gold in 2010. He joined Go Gold as a strategic advisor in 2010 and became president and CEO in 2016. So welcome, Brad.
Thank you. Okay, I guess if we could just go to the first slide there, that'd be great. So a little bit about Go Gold and what we're doing in Mexico and myself. I've actually spent my whole career in Mexico building mines and a lot in the exploration development part of the business. And currently Go Gold has one producing asset, the Parral Tailings retreatment project. And we currently do not have any tailings dams, but it is kind of unique in what we're doing here. Parral is a city of 130,000 people, and they had a mine that operated for over 300 years. And these tailings were deposited right in the city. You can see the city kind of is growing around the tailings. They're deposited, of course, without a liner and non-engineered tailings. So what we've done is we have a deal with the municipality of Parral. They're our partner on it. We pay $70,000 US a month towards the municipality. We also have several initiatives in the community, assisting in things like, well, we use the roads. So, for example, last year we contributed $300,000 worth of cement for some paving in the town. And what we're doing mostly, though, the most important thing to them is that we're transporting these tailings out of the city into an agglomerated heap leach. And as far as I know, in the world, at least at this scale, I don't know of any other company who has taken old tailings, these are flotation tailings, and agglomerated heap leach them. So, so we're taking, and if you go to the next slide, please. So here's the original tailings, last deposited in 1980. And we're taking those tailings, transporting them 14 kilometers outside of the city. And our next slide, please. To our facility that was built in 2014, where we mix the old tailings with 20 kilos per ton of cement, and we put them on a heap leach. And we leach them, we recover gold and silver. And of course, it's just at a 21st century environmental standard. It's a good benefit to the municipality as far as direct payments, as far as employment. We employ 250 people. As far as removing these tailings from the municipality, the initial payment that we made to the city when we acquired these of $1 million actually retooled the city with LED lights. That's what they used the original payment for. And that, along with all of the other things we're doing in the community, we've taken a bad situation as far as environmentally, and we've turned it into a situation for all the stakeholders, including our shareholders, where we generate revenue out of this. We just released our quarter today, where we had $6.7 million US of free cash flow generated from this. And so that, along with the employment and cleaning up the environment, you know, it's really a win-win, you know, we think for everybody here. And it's I think a kind of a novel way to approach remediation of tailings, old tailings. And we had started with 20 million tons of tailings here. And of course, there's hundreds of millions of tons of old tailings in Mexico that some of those, this may be applicable to, and a way to clean those old tailings up. The other thing we're doing, we have an exploration development asset in Jalisco State, and there we've just completed a PEA, and we're going to have a mill, 5,000 tons a day, and a tailings facility there. So of course, this is of a very big interest to us, that as a company that we follow all the guidelines and you know, meet the standard. There, our plan is to have dry stack tailings, detoxified dry stack tailings, and the same with Mitch and Core. We have paste backfill. Part of that operation will be an underground mine, and in fact, those tailings will also be used at the bottom of our open pit to create an artificial crown pillar with cemented tailings as well. So I think that's, I don't know if there's one more slide. Yeah, I think I've already spoke to most of these things as far as Corral and the benefits we see for the community and for the company and all the stakeholders, our employees, with this kind of, I call it innovation in reclamation of tailings.
Excellent. Well, thank you all for that introduction. So now we'll move into the panel discussion, and I'll just stop sharing my screen. So first, I'd like to start with a question for Mitch. The mining industry is an essential contributor to a modern economy. With respect to tailings management, what is your company doing to preserve and expand our social license to operate and improve the industry's image? Yeah,
I think, well, first it starts with you've got to have a consistent message, right? If you've got to be true to who you are, to your track record. You've got to live those values every day, and that people can tell if you're legitimate or not, and that that's really at the core of who we are. Pardon the pun. we have really, I think, done a much better job on the outreach and engagement front. The old adage that if you don't tell your story, someone else will. And in the absence of information, a lot of times people will just assume the worst or assume something that's not correct. And so, whether it's in the communities, with the communities, both before anything is ever built, and then during getting people out there to site, taking the time to bring people, curious people that actually will, are willing to come out and spend some time to get a better understanding of what a tailings impoundment is. Regulators and legislators to take the time and stop thinking about mining and having that internal view, and really opening up and being willing to share and engage it sounds pretty simple, but I think it's very powerful. The transparency initiatives that are now gaining momentum, I think, are great for sort of acting as a catalyst, like GISTM and others, for getting information out there in what is otherwise sort of a vacuum. And so that communication, education, kind of the what, the why, the how behind what we're doing, and then connecting the dots. You said the words, I think, modern economy. It never ceases to amaze me how those dots aren't connected in most people's minds between what we do and how important that is to modern society, to things like clean energy goals, electric vehicles, technology. And when people start, I can see the light bulb go on in people's eyes when they realize that what we're doing is really critical to things like solar panels and renewable energy sources and things like that. And it can never overestimate how just the awareness of what we do in most people's minds that don't live our industry day in and day out like us. And then this is the last thing I'd say is we were always pushing ourselves to constantly sort of proactively look for what's out there that we can do better, new approaches, and just keep upping our game, whether it's in construction and design, whether it's in how we manage or control water, the monitoring, whether it's on the analytics side to get data in real time so that we know, we have a much closer finger on the pulse of those facilities, never sort of resting on our laurels and always trying to find and apply lessons learned and best practices from anywhere we can find them. So those are some thoughts, Kim.
Absolutely. Well, thank you very much for that. I really appreciate it. And the comments that you made about, trying to help society connect the dots, because so often they don't realize that, in order to have solar power, or in order to have an electric car, or even use a computer, where the materials are coming from. So thank you for that. Brad, did you want to make any additional comments on that particular question about what your company is doing as well to preserve and expand your social license to operate and improve the industry's image?
Yeah, sure. I mean, it's interesting. I mean, we're a junior miner. We're a rapidly growing junior miner, and we don't necessarily always have the same resources as a larger company. We depend more on consultants. For example, our tailings, our heap leach, we use Golder a lot as a consultant there. But we certainly do understand that if we want to grow, and that's what we want to do, and develop mines, that we do need that social license. And I go back to Parral and the success there. It's really as a small company, we entered into that community. We saw that opportunity. We have a great team. Our team, many of us have been together for the last 15, 20 years. And, as far as working in Mexico, in our company, there'd be 5 people who are not Mexican. I mean, the majority of our company are Mexicans, and it's their community. Many of them are from Parral. And, here you have these messy old tailings not lime. The windy season of the year, the dust blows through their city, and the city actually approached us and said, is there an economic way? Is there an environmental way? And is there a way that everybody can benefit here from putting this all together? So with a lot of study, and we created a little innovation around this, with tailings, that it really has worked out well. And we think there is social benefit in that. There is benefit to all our stakeholders to expand that business and in Mexico. And I think as we go forward, beyond just exploring and developing new deposits, we think there's a great social benefit, and there is an economic benefit to us to look at some of these old tailings and see if this technology would apply.
Thank you very much for that. Really appreciate it. And obviously, with your special case, you have extremely strong community support, and it's a very mutually beneficial project. So excellent. Elaine, a question for you. So, as you were a member of the advisory group that supported development of the global industry standard on tailings management, could you provide your perspective on the process as well as the outcome of that?
Thanks very much, Kim. Well, as you said, there were 3 co-conveners, ICMM, UNEP, and UNPRI. And I think it was part of the reason that the process that we ended up with the standard at the end was that we had that investor group there, because they actually, equalised the balance of power between the other 2 groups, and they were absolutely essential. Now, we had the 16-member advisory group, who were multi-stakeholder group, so lots of different perspectives, and there were 7 people on the expert panel, and we had the independent chair, Bruno. And Bruno, he had the final say in the choice of the expert panel, and the expert panel actually wrote the standard. And it was interesting, the composition of that expert panel, because only 2 of them were geotechnical people. The rest were environmental, organisational behaviour, legal, and social. So in the choice of the panel, I think Bruno, who doesn't come from a mining background and didn't know very much about tailings dams, he was kind of acknowledging that we actually know how to build a tailings dam. So what are the other things that we need to consider in this standard that are going to ensure that we have safety? Now, I saw it pretty much as a consensus project. Some people didn't, but I think in the end it was a consensus project. There were people that were disappointed with things like that there wasn't a call for the total ban of upstream tailings dams, and that we didn't actually address marine or riverine disposal. They weren't part of the brief. But I think what I think everybody can say that it was, we ended up with a standard. We ended up with something that we can work with, and both Mitch and Brad alluded to that. So I think it was, it turned out to be a very important process, and I think we can see it as an evolving process as well.
Absolutely. Thank you for that. So just another question on the global industry standard on tailings management, but this time for Brad and for Mitch. Do your companies plan to comply with the GISTM? And if so, what is your implementation plan and timeframe to achieve compliance? Brad, this may be not applicable to you right now because I'm thinking through your project and if it really applies with the GISTM now or it's more future development opportunities.
That's correct. I mean, we are looking at building in our Los Ricos project, and that's more of a 2023. But for sure, we'd want to comply, and that's a dry stack tailing operation with paste backfill back into our underground as well, similar to what Mitch has mentioned with some of his operations.
Perfect. And what about you, Mitch?
Yeah, we've been big supporters of what Elaine was talking about in terms of the centralized database. I think we're supposed to be in there. Your list of alphabetized companies just cut off before COEUR, so I was hoping for a shameless plug there. And the Church of England disclosures, we were very quick to respond to that and view that as a constructive effort. And we'll start to enhance our existing disclosures to align with GISTM here in the first half of the year. Simultaneous with that, we're doing a self-assessment here early in the year to compare ourselves where we are to the standard. We think we can get there at all of our locations in less than 5 years. But we'll get through that assessment and then have a better sense. But that's how we see it right now.
Perfect. Thank you very much for that. So Elaine, I'd like to ask a question to you, since we've been talking about the Global Tailings Portal and the disclosures. What are the next steps proposed for tailings disclosures and information to be included on the Global Tailings Portal?
Kim, maybe you can put up that final slide that I had, because I think I've sort of summarized it there.
Yes, I will see if I can get that to work out for me.
I can just start by saying, that it was interesting to hear Mitch say that they're going to update the disclosures to align with the standard, because that's one of the first things that we're doing. Where there was a call by the Church of England at the recent meeting roundtable that they had on the anniversary of Brumadinho on the 25th of last month, calling for expressions of interest to be part of a technical advisory group to update the portal. And the kind of most important thing with that technical advisory group is to revise the questions, the disclosure questions, so that they align with the standard. I mean, with this new independent entity, we'll see how that's going to operate. But my, the hope was that the portal would be part of the audit mechanism for the new independent entity. But we have to. There's a lot of negotiation that we have to do with developing those questions, because we want them to. We don't want them to be incredibly onerous for companies, especially small companies like Krabs. And I think what people will find with well-run companies, that they already comply with much of the standard. But we want to make it a seamless process. So. As I mentioned in my introduction, the first round, the 20 questions, which weren't actually formulated in a way that was really conducive to developing a database, so it was very tricky. So these questions will be, much more database friendly. And we want the companies to be able to automatically upload them themselves. That's what I was going to say, actually, that in the first round, we had to scrape the information off the company's websites. And that there's a lot of room for error when you do that. We had to go back to the companies when we put it on the database and get their confirmation that it was correct. So it was a really laborious process. So in the next round, we want to have a secure login for companies. They can upload their data, and it means they have an audit trail themselves, and they can change their disclosure information at any time. So I think it will be much more useful. The other thing, as I mentioned in the beginning, the original portal was designed just with the 20 questions, which were really focused on investor needs. But the next round, hopefully, we're going to start to include lists of legacy mines and other geographies that are not covered in the disclosures at the moment. So we want to go beyond that and make it a much broader and much more comprehensive information site for a whole range of stakeholders. So not just the investor community.
Thank you for that. And I think that it makes a whole lot of sense for you to provide the companies with a secure login so that they can make sure that their information is correct. As we've looked through where our facilities plot on your database, we realized that there were some disconnects, for instance, with the northings and eastings provided. So some cleanup that needs to happen. And I think that it does make more sense to put that onus on the companies themselves to make sure that that information is correct. And I know that ICMM is supporting this technical advisory group. They did send out a call for support to that, to support the next phase of questions for the portal. So just to continue a little bit more on discussions around the GISTM, and Mitch and Brad, you've both indicated that your companies do plan to implement that, but this is a general question for all three of our panelists. because ICMM member companies have made a commitment to comply as a condition of membership. But in the opinion of each of you, do you think that the GISTM can be enforced on a global basis to non-ICMM member companies, and why or why not? So I'd like to start with Mitch, if I could.
Yeah, hard to say. I hope so. Time will tell. Obviously early stages in the rollout. As a non-ICMM company facing the challenge / opportunity of an ever-growing list of frameworks and standards, it becomes a bit onerous. I'm facing this right now. In the U.S., there's the U.S. equivalent of CAMIMEX in Mexico is the National Mining Association, and I'm heading up our ESG effort for the industry, for the association, and just this duplication, reporting burden is a concern for a lot of the smaller companies, and it's very real, and it's overwhelming and confusing. So this big company versus small company dichotomy is something that sounds like, based on Elaine's comments, that's being sort of factored into the thought process. But I think ultimately, the enforcement might occur more sort of informally or almost market-based, right? Like whether it's providers of capital, investors, communities, NGOs, regulators, that's just the cost of doing business. And to me, it's sort of like however we get there is less important. The fact that if we can get there overall as an industry and just collectively up our game, it's only going to help everyone.
Absolutely agree with that. Thank you, Mitch. Brad, do you have any thoughts on it?
Yeah, I kind of concur with Mitch there a lot. On it's very important to us. We want to best practices, and as an industry, it's very important as far as the industry image. I think from the junior company perspective, and enforcement, it's probably going to be somewhat difficult. The juniors don't have as much as much resources available to them. And like I mentioned before, some of it will go outside to contractors. We are working on our ESG right now, and we are using external contractor on our ESG. And but I concur with Mitch. It's going to be probably in the junior space driven a lot by the investors and the institutions. If you're a company like ours and you're going to want to grow, and it's typically I've started 4 juniors, and I know the progression of juniors, from that friends and family all the way up to mid-tier producer, and it's at different stages of investors all the way along. Now we're fortunate, our investor registry has some of the top investors in our space are investing in gold now, so it'll be driven a lot, I think, by the investment community.
I think that those are excellent questions, and they actually follow on to a bit the next question, which is the announcement that came out on December 18th from the Church of England and the Swedish Council, that they plan to establish an independent institute to support compliance with the GISTM. So, Elaine, what are your thoughts on that announcement and establishment of this independent institute?
Well, that was talked about a lot during the development of the standard. Like, where does this go? Like, we're making this standard and we're just going to drop it like a hot potato and hope that people will pick it up, or are we going to put in place some sort of mechanism? And the report that came out in conjunction with the standard had 5, I think they listed 5 options. And the last one was the Independent Institute. And that's what the co-conveners have gone with. Actually, it's being driven by UNEP and the PRI. ICMM is supporting it, but they're not actually part of the development of that Independent Institute. And the UNEP put out a call for a consultant to to look at how that institute could be developed, how a funding model, and how it would work with companies and auditors, etc. So it'll be some time before we get a kind of an idea of what it's going to look like. But I think the initial model was taken from the very successful cyanide code. So that's the kind of way that they're thinking. And so I think it's an exciting thing, and I was really, really heartened that it's happening, because it does show that we're serious. One of the things, just to go back, one thing I wanted to say about the previous question was that can smaller companies comply with the standard? Well, at the same time as the Church of England and the Swedish Council of Ethics made that announcement, they also sent out a message to mining companies to say whether they were going to commit to the standard. And as you said, the IC member companies have all said yes. But we've had a lot of responses from small companies who have said, yes, we are committed to implementing this standard. Like Brad and Mitch, they're not going to be able to do it, tomorrow, but they are committed to working towards this. So there's already been, a lot of support from smaller companies for the standard. And one of the other things that I would say is I hope that the portal can support companies in their reporting processes with the kind of organisations that Mitch mentioned, that we can make this a tool that companies can actually use. So, supporting the standard will be a plus in other areas of operation. So.
All right, thank you for that. So a question for Brad and for Mitch. What are you or others in your organization doing to make sure that your company executives, obviously other than yourself, and your board members appreciate the risks of your tailing storage facilities? Mitch looks like he's ready to comment.
Sure. Well, the board, as I'm sure you all have the same experience, heat maps, enterprise risk management, our framework there, sure, like yours, has tailings management sort of up and to the right on things. And so that gets a lot of board attention, as it should, and that's great. And that drives a lot of great focus and discussion at the board level, which then that means, there's a lot of good discussion and focus at the management team level. We have we call it the EHSCR committee of the board, Environmental Health, Safety, Community Relations Board. and this is a topic that, is on the regular agenda. They get all the third party independent expert reviews, not summaries, they get the whole thing. And then they can, in terms of any recommendations or anything that come out of those, we report back on our progress in addressing anything that was raised or flagged on any of those reviews. And just, starting really with our overall strategy. I mean, strategy here incorporates the importance of risk management, and tailings is obviously a big element to that. And just we really, in our strategic objectives and discussions, we tie the notion that, this is sustainable tailings management is aligned with our financial and operating performance. It's not a trade-off. It's not a give and take. And so again, culture, values, purpose, those things sort of set the tone. Risk management framework really helps drive the discussion with the board, and having that committee focus is an extra catalyst for that focus.
Thank you for that, Mitch. Yes, very similar within our organization as well. Brad?
Yeah, I think from a more the junior company perspective, and again a fast-growing junior company, our board is very concerned about it. We don't have a tailing impoundment right now, but we're in the process of doing the studies, and it's in a sense, it's going to be much easier for us. If we were a junior and we already had a tailings dam and we had to meet the standard, that's more difficult. And like Eleanor, you mentioned, there'd be some time to do that. But our board as well is very concerned about best practices, and we use a lot more external consultants for ESG and things like this than would a larger company. But yeah, it's a big concern to our board as well.
Thank you both for that feedback. So now we'll talk a little bit about technology, since that is the topic of the session. So question for Mitch. What new technologies is your company considering with respect to reducing tailings facility risk, and do the economics appear favorable on a life cycle basis? For instance, what initiatives is your company looking at towards zero waste that will reduce, eliminate, or beneficially use the tailings you generate? I know during the opening remarks from both yourself, Mitch, and Brad, you discussed some of those things that you have underway within your organization. So just want to give you an opportunity to spend a little bit more time either talking about those items or others.
Yeah, okay, sure, thanks. I think, Palmarejo and what we're doing there in Chihuahua is probably a really good place to start, a good example there of reusing an existing pit for filtered tailings. Big positive impacts there on water. That obviously contributes to ultimate pit reclamation and allows us to kind of get out of that management of the existing facility, close that up, which is great. I know Seminole is a big fan of the approach, and we're excited about making that transition. The economics are great, in terms of water savings and everything else that can drive. I talked about cement rock or cement backfill up at Kensington, what that can do in terms of just geotech underground support. Obviously less volume than on the surface, with all of which is good. I didn't mention up at the Silvertip mine, which is the one up in northern British Columbia. That's currently on care and maintenance, but that is a filtered dry stack facility, and that obviously is a much better approach with what we can do with getting that water and reusing that in the process. Some other things that we are looking at, maybe not totally groundbreaking, but I did mention just satellite wireless real-time monitoring and having those analytics, especially for these remote sites, so that we can monitor that information in a real-time basis. And this back to the National Mining Association. That's an industry association made up of both hard rock miners and coal. And so I hear a lot about CO2 and emissions, and there's some pretty neat stuff going on in the research world around sequestration and how can tailings play a part in that. I know it's kind of early days, but boy, that's exciting and interesting. Not something we're directly doing anything about right now, but it's something that we're definitely keeping an eye on. And then even just on the filter side, ceramics, there's some new technologies there that are coming along that we're keeping an eye on. So, this is one of those areas of our business that you don't really think a lot about innovation, but there's plenty going on, and it's great to see. And we might not be the leaders in new innovation, but we definitely would like to be fast followers as these things get proven out by others. So Kim, we'll follow you.
Yes, well, the interesting thing is that's our motto as well. We are fast followers.
Oh, really?
But with that
fast.
said, that's the way that Newmont has been in the past, but we are actually working to improve some technology as well. And I really like what you were talking about technology. And in fact, the word technologies is used 5 times in the GISTM. So there's definitely a push towards improved technology therein. And when you're talking about, paste backfill and in-pit tailings and filtration, a lot of times people get hung up on the CapEx and OpEx. But when you look at tailings costs, taking a life cycle approach, considering closure, but also considering the cost of water management, when you look at all of that holistically we can actually start to see that there's significant benefits as we move towards improved technology. And it's really nice to see that both your company as well as Brad's Go Gold are doing great things on the technology front. But Brad, what about you? What else would you like to say about Go Gold on the technology front?
You know, I've talked a lot about the reclamation of the tailings in Corral, and I think that is important for the more the reclamation part of tailings and these old tailings in Mexico. But also, you know, with the dry stack and during our PEA, you know, we looked at that because water is a real consideration, water management, and you know, the beneficial effect. Yes, there was a economic beneficial impact of the dry stack tailings and recycling that water. And also our particular situation, we have, we have to create a pillar in the bottom, a crown pillar in the bottom of our open pit so that we can get some very high grade material mined in the underground below that crown pillar. And that's a great use for those dry stack tailings and paste backfill plant.
Perfect, thank you. Elaine, I have a question for you. So what do we need to do differently today to truly ensure that the lessons learned from past tailings dam failures are not overlooked and repeated?
Thanks, Kim. Well, I think Mitch, in talking about his company, covered quite a lot of them in terms of communication, making people accountable. I mean, boards set the risk appetite for companies, and shareholders need to make boards accountable for their ongoing risk management. One of the things that you learn from looking at the reports post-failure by people like Professor Morgenstern is that accidents, they seem to be a bit like airplane accidents. There's usually not one single cause. There are a whole lot of failures right along, right across the board where information is overlooked or misinterpreted. So I think one of the things that came out of the standard was that there needed to be better both sort of vertical and horizontal communication, so that we didn't have these silos where waste was off to the side, and also I think one of the things that we really wanted to see was that performance bonuses weren't just tied to productivity, that safety was really, proactive safety was really built into the culture of a company. And I think that, the global standard makes a lot of things very transparent now. You can, with the portal, you can look at, you can look at companies and you can see how much tailings they have, and people are surprised by the amount of waste that's generated. They don't realise that these are very, very small concentrations that we're getting out of this rock, and so there's this huge waste problem. And as both our other panelists said, it hasn't been a site for huge innovation. I mean, it's in many places we're treating tailings the same way as the Romans did. We dig a hole and put it in it, So there's a lot of room for innovation here. And as you said, it's going to become economically, attractive for people to manage tailings better. As communities and stakeholders ask more from companies, there'll be cost savings in doing this in an innovative way. So.
Thank you for that. So we are getting close to the end of the session. And so I think I'll just ask one more question, but generally open it up for some final comments as we are coming near the end. So do you have any advice as to how individual companies might approach the management of their own reputation in parallel and in concert with the management of the industry's reputation as a whole, as it pertains to tailings management and doing things better and safer?
I get, yeah, go ahead.
Brett.
Yep.
Some of it will be repetitive. I think it's the flying under the radar screen is not an effective strategy. I think this industry has always, in general, tried to stay off a lot of different radar screens, and it's such a missed opportunity. I mean, just listen to this discussion and other discussions in this forum today and yesterday. There's so much good so many stories to tell. And again, I go back to the connecting the dots with why we do this. This is not a fool's errand where we're out there with a pickaxe, trying to find a nugget of gold. And I think that's a big part of it. But there aren't any shortcuts, right? You can't just go out there and start pounding your chest and saying we're this and that. You've got to have the substance, and that takes time.
Great.
Yeah.
Brad?
Yeah, I think what I would add to that is, it's important for us all to work on that social license. And there's so much damage done by one catastrophic failure of a tailings dam, and that is obviously horrible in the human impact, and it's horrible for the industry. And we have to act responsibly, and we hope that all our peers do as well. And this forum and this initiative is great. I mean, it's very educational for everybody. It's coming from the junior perspective. This is very good. It's a great job you have done on Ellen, you've done on this initiative in your team.
One last thing, Kim, I would just throw in real quick is sometimes I think because we're not very well versed in telling our story, that when we do try, we do a lot of talking and we don't stop and listen. And I think hearing what communities, what regulators, what NGOs, what are the concerns, what are the sensitive points, and either trying to address them or actually incorporate them into the design or the operation, and then make sure that they see that. And just having that attitude goes a long way.
Can I just very quickly say, I know that Kim's wanting to wrap this up, but those sort of things, Mitch, are in the standard, that communication with communities, seeing what they wanted. But I just wanted to make one final point, if I could. I mean, it's a typical business, mining, in some ways. Prices go up and down, and it's essentially an industry that no one appreciates, and there's this kind of air of secrecy. But I think one of the really important things is we as a society have to be prepared to pay what it actually costs, and not keep on pushing the environmental cost down the road to the next generation, where we're going to leave a whole lot of tailings dams, for someone else to deal with. So that's my final point, that I think we really need to push that home now, that people, individuals need to know what this iPhone actually means, So anyway, thank you.
Thank you very much for that. And thank you all. Thank you very much to our panelists. So just want to leave you with just a couple of final thoughts. So what we've seen with recent failures is that anyone's tailings dam failure is in fact everyone's tailings dam failure. So we need to work better as an industry. And so I just like to leave this session with one quote that comes from the Independent Expert Engineering Investigation and Review Panel on the Mount Poly failure from 2015. And they stated that the future requires not only an improved adoption of best applicable practices, but also a migration to best available technology.